of the Bible and education, dealing with the book of Ruth. And we're going to start with a prayer. Then I'll explain what we're doing, and I will remove the pair of socks from the background, which I just realized is there. Brian, do you want to start with the prayer real quick while I run and take care of that?
Definitely can do that. All right, dear Lord, we just come before you today. Says you're an awesome and you're a mighty God. Says you watch over us, you take care of us, you give us everything we need to grow, dear Lord, and we thank you for that. I just pray, dear Lord, that you would help us to really dig into this book of Ruth and kind of find out more about what it means to actually um, be a Christian in education, so that we can understand better how to serve you in that particular area. We thank you for this opportunity and for all those who could make it and all for those who couldn't. We thank you for it all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that prayer and for giving me that second there to clean up a little what's in the back. All right, this is this week's broadcast of the Bible and education. For people who haven't been part of this is part of the Berean Academy, which is a new school launch that we're working on here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And what we're doing is every week we are looking at a different book of the Bible through the eyes of educators. We're not trying to learn how to teach the Bible, but rather we're letting the Bible teach us how to teach. And so we have found a lot of interesting insights. We did the book of Judges in our last broadcast, and now we're looking at the book of Ruth. It's short, it's sweet, but it's got a lot of stuff in there. The book of Ruth is a story, it is connected to the larger narrative of the Bible because Ruth, of course, was one of the ancestors of Jesus Christ. She was a Moabite, so she was a descendant of Lot's daughters. She was not part of Israel, and that's part of the story. Ruth is a story that tends to warm people's hearts, and it gave us one of the verses that is very often read at weddings. But what does it say to us through the eyes of teachers? Now, there's a couple issues that I thought the book of Ruth really drives home. I want to first start out by pointing out that Ruth lives in the time of the judges. So all of the things that we were talking about in last week's podcast about the fact that the time of the judges was a time when there was great failure. There were moments of heroism in the time of the judges, but every hero, whether it was Gideon or Samson or Jephthah, they failed to pass on their wisdom to the next generation. And that was what chronically afflicted Israel during this time, is the fact that nobody was educating anyone. You don't have a single image in the book of Judges of any of the fathers passing down to their sons the wisdom or the right way of living. They're certainly not reading the law to them. Even Gideon, whom we love, had a very bad track record with his sons. But then from there, you jump into the book of Ruth. And what's interesting is that even though Ruth is short and it doesn't deal with, complete, I don't know how you'd put it, even though it doesn't deal with something dramatic and epic, it's just the story of one woman and her mother-in-law trying to make their way in the world. It's great because it gives us an example of how education could look in the time of Judges, because this is one moment in the time of Judges where you have a clear example of an elder really passing on wisdom to the next generation. And it's fitting that that takes place within the lineage of Jesus Christ, because remember that Jesus considered himself a teacher, and he was the best teacher of all time, the way that he passed down parables to everyone. So it makes sense that within the book of Judges, his ancestor, Ruth, was part of this process of learning and of education. I want to start out with the first chapter to see how this book opens and to introduce ourselves to the character of Ruth and her sister-in-law and her mother-in-law. Starting in verse 1, it says, "During the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and his 2 sons to live in the land of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the land of Moab and settled there. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the second was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 children and without her husband. She and her daughter-in-laws prepared to leave the land of Moab because she had heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's need by providing them food. She left the place where she had been living, accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, and traveled along the road leading back to the land of Judah. She said to them, "Each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show faithful love to you, as you have shown to the dead and to me. May the Lord enable each of you to find security in the house of your new husband." She kissed them, and they wept loudly. "No," they said to her, "we will go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters, my life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Again they wept loudly, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her God. Follow your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Do not persuade me to leave you or go back and not follow you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh punish me and do so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." Now, the reason why I think that this is a very important book from the position of an educator is because there is a very close relationship between Ruth and Naomi, one that involves uh, Ruth's willingness to conform to the ways of life, really, that Naomi had. She's going to go back, and her people are going to be her people. Her God is going to be her God. Her language is going to be her language. So she is being transformed through a process that looks a lot like education. And the rest of the book is a lot about basically Naomi advising and teaching her of how to manage things when they get back to Israel. And this is happening in that time of the Judges when nobody's really teaching anyone of anything. But what's interesting is, what exactly is Naomi's relationship to Ruth based on? Brian, is it based on blood relationships, technically?
No, you can't necessarily say that. In fact, part of what I
Right.
was thinking about here, we actually moved to Moab.
Right.
That they took, so that her sons took daughters from Moab, which I think is kind of, wasn't that like against the rules? They weren't
Well,
really
it was
supposed
against
to do that.
it was against the rules, and that adds to the whole irony of the Book of Judges, because I mean, the fact of the matter is that at a time when Israel was so declining, it was so decadent. The one moment, the glimmer of hope we have during this time period involves a Moabite woman who wasn't even supposed to be married to an Israelite man. So it's interesting. Naomi is not Ruth's mother. They don't share any blood. They're not even part of the same people group, right? They are not even supposed to be connected. And yet you have the older woman inspiring this confidence and this loyalty in the younger woman, and then basically giving her a people, an identity, a way of life, a set of customs, all of those things. Naomi gives to Ruth. I think that this shows us the power of the teacher, first of all, before we get to the issues of the role of women in Christian education, which I think there's a lot to talk about with the Book of Ruth. I think whether you're a woman or a man, one of the important messages from the Book of Ruth is that is the power of the teacher. I mean, Naomi is the epitome of a good teacher. She's someone who has traveled with Ruth and has instilled her in such confidence. She has been such a good example to Ruth that Ruth is willing to take on things that are foreign to her to become part of Naomi's world. because she wants to follow in Naomi's footsteps. And she's willing to do that even to the extent that she is, she's going to have to face the fact that she's going to be a foreigner and she's going to be poor in another land. And the beauty of all this, of course, is that this is the way that Ruth is brought into the lineage of Jesus.
Yeah, something I was actually thinking of was that it must have kind of interesting situation here. Orpah went back, understandably so,
right.
to her
Mm-hmm.
people.
Right.
But Ruth hung around with Naomi. So, I mean, the fact that they even, both of them actually said, no, we're going to stay with you the first time, much less Ruth actually hanging out with her, Naomi must have been a pretty good person, or have inspired some sort of confidence in them to the point that, at least, like I said, they both wanted to stay, but, Naomi made a good point, and Orpah said, you know what, good point, I'm going to go ahead and go back. But, Ruth decided to stay. So, I mean, there must have been something about her, that really inspired them to, as you say, take this opportunity, chance, whatever you'd like to call it, and actually kind of go down this road in the first place,
Yeah, I think that the main thing that I noticed from it is that Naomi, she's a good mentor. She is the perfect example. If you're in a mentor situation, I think that she chose the epitome of a good mentorship. And part of mentorship is that Naomi is willing to let Ruth go. She's not trying to control Ruth. Did you realize that? In the chapter we just read, Naomi actually says to Ruth, "You should go. I can't give you any sons. You're free to go." And Ruth, she decides to go. Now, you have an interesting dynamic here, because in mentorship situations, if you're a good mentor, there are going to be some people that you don't have that connection with, and others that you do, right? Orpah leaves because she does not feel that same kind of call to follow Naomi that Ruth does. And that's how things go as a teacher and as a mentor. I think that you have to be willing to let circumstances, to let God place in your path the people that you really are meant to teach in this very close way. And you have to accept the fact that not everyone is going to connect with your mentorship or your teaching methods. So you have, in the one hand, one of the women, there's just this connection. You can't really explain why. The text does not tell us exactly why Ruth and Naomi have this very special bond. It presents us what the bond looks like. And in a certain sense, unfortunately, I use the term unfortunately with some caution, I would say we can't draw from that a really clear example of how to be a good mentor or how to create a mentoring relationship like this. All we can do is be available for when that mentoring relationship happens. You see what I'm saying, Brian?
For you. Yeah, I do. But I got a question for you. Being that you've been a teacher and you've done this, or I assume you probably been a mentor of some sort. As you said, some folks you're gonna connect with, some folks you're not. And if you've got a classroom full of students, some of them you're going to connect with, some of them you're not. How does that play out in that particular situation? You know what I mean? Because I've never been a teacher personally. I've been a student, but you know what I'm saying. How does that work out for you?
I think that the Book of Ruth, in a certain sense, reminds me that those arrangements where you're a teacher standing behind a desk and there's 30 or 40 people listening to you is not really an ideal scenario for education, because of the fact that you can't really get to know the students well enough to inspire that kind of confidence. I mean, think of those lines. Let me read them one more time. Those lines that Ruth says, which, did they read these at your wedding? These lines?
Oh man, that was a while. I've been married now, 28 years, dude. I can't remember. That's been a long time.
I know that a lot of weddings, they read this.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's very, very common.
Okay. Do not persuade me to leave you to go back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh punish me and do so severely if anything but death separates you and me. I mean, that is of course, it sounds like a great story about love, but it's not really appropriate to read at a wedding because it's about a woman speaking to the mother of her dead husband. And as she goes and follows her, what's interesting is she's not a blood relative of Naomi. She's not going to be tied to Naomi through the bonds of marriage either. Naomi is not going to have any children of her own, and yet this relationship is so incredibly important that it gives us those lines of the Bible. And I am going to say that that is the teacher-student or mentor-mentee relationship right there. It is a relationship where there's a certain amount of confidence. I don't want to make it sound like there's erotic or romantic love involved in a teaching relationship, because that would be bad, right? And so it's interesting because in Ruth, there's a close relationship that's not sexual, it's not erotic, it's not romantic. They're not in love with each other. These women are not, they're not lesbians. They are two people who have seen in each other great potential, and so they have a relationship. And those lines about, wherever you go, I will go, to a certain degree, that's the best that you can get in a teaching relationship, is to know that you're going to live on forever through your students. That if you can give them wisdom or knowledge that really lasts, that they will always be taking you with them, even if they're not, in your presence, even if they're not physically close to you. And it's the other part of this that we have to remember is that Naomi does not have children, but Ruth volunteers to adopt her as a mother, interestingly enough, because she is going to follow her people, her way of life. She's going to go live in the land that Naomi is from. And in that way, Naomi will be able to live with the knowledge that someone did carry on her legacy, even though it wasn't through blood or through marriage. And so I think the Book of Ruth shows you the power of the relationship that is at the core of education, which is the older person giving the wisdom to the younger person. It's the teacher-student relationship. The thing about Ruth that is challenging for us for our purposes is that this book of the Bible does not give us a set of instructions as to how to be that kind of a mentor. It doesn't show you how to find a Ruth. It's all through circumstances that God ordained that Ruth and Naomi have this relationship. And Naomi's legacy is nothing to laugh at, because Ruth becomes an ancestor of Jesus Christ, right? So, it's a very big honor for Naomi to have this person carrying her legacy, even though she's not even from Israel. She's a Moabite.
Just to that point, they talking
Mm-hmm.
about was it back in Joshua, talking about Rahab, same thing. It's kind of like that person who's not a Jew, person who's
Right.
not necessarily from inside, the family, and who actually becomes literally a part of the lineage of Jesus, through David or whatever like that. It's kind of the same situation. It's kind of almost how I saw it, kind of like when we talked about Rahab, this person who, through circumstances, believed in God and followed accordingly. In this particular case, she followed Naomi back to Israel to become basically an Israelite by proxy, because she married an Israelite, and so they were kind of connected in that way. But it just the way it all worked out, and she was grafted in. If you want to kind of go there into the situation.
It's interesting too, because Rahab and Naomi are two very different models of how to be enlightened. Rahab, it comes to her on the fly, right in the moment. She hears a story about how God is working these wonders, and so she decides that she's part of them, that she's going to believe in their God. I think that Ruth is part of a very gradual, very long-term, and very thorough mentorship relationship with someone who really means a lot to her. A way to look at this as an educator is to ask yourself a couple questions. Who were teachers in your life who really inspired that in you, that you wanted to go and be among their people? You wanted to make their God your God. People who really inspired you with that sense of confidence, where You don't ever want to be separated from them, not in the sense that you're going to like move into their house or stalk them or something, but rather in the sense that, you feel like what they taught you is so important that you want them to know that you're always going to carry on the torch for them, and then you have to ask yourself if you have one of those mentor relationships. I can think of one. I don't speak to that professor anymore. I think the political differences, once I became less left wing, they don't want to talk to me anymore. But I did have a mentorship relationship like that was very close in graduate school and very, very meaningful. But you have to ask yourself, how did you come into those mentorship relationships? And often it's not something that you can plan. It really is something that it has to come from God. God has to kind of put you in that path. There are many times that you have a teacher and you have a student and, they get along just fine and one can learn from the other. You don't have a Naomi Ruth kind of situation. It's not like that mentor really, really, really draws you into their world and makes you be committed to them for life. It's just, I think that God has to be part of it. I don't think there's any way to try to plan it or to contrive it. This is why when people call me and they ask for advice about where to go to graduate school, and they say, well, I've heard from other people that I should look for where the best scholars in my field are and go and work under that mentor. And I don't think that's a good idea, because I know so many cases where people go and they want to study with John Smith, who's the expert in some field that you're studying, and you arrive there and you realize that John Smith is a jerk, or you don't work well with him. Maybe he writes great books, but he's not a good mentor. Or even you get there and then after really being exposed to the scholar, all of a sudden you realize, I don't feel the way that Ruth feels towards Naomi. I don't feel like I want to follow this person all the way into their way of thinking, into their customs, and I don't want to make their God my God. I'm not going to do that, right? So I think that it really is largely by chance. You just have to, as a mentor, as a teacher, you have to make yourself available. And if you do have an interaction with a student or someone you're mentoring, and it is that close, I think that you have to be open to that. You have to be open to the fact, and you have to rejoice in it. You have to, say, wow, I won. I especially, in Christian education, you want your students to believe in Jesus Christ. I mean, you want your belief system to take hold in them. You want that eternal life to be, a flame that's burning inside them. You shouldn't feel ashamed of that. It can be a little bit overwhelming when you do have a student who feels that strongly about what you've taught them. But if you make yourself available to a student and you follow through when they have really been transformed in that way, because I think that what the Ruth and Naomi relationship reminds us of is the fact that when someone is your teacher, there are moments when you are really, really affected by what you're learning. I mean, positive or negative, whether it makes you feel really happy or whether it makes you feel really stressed out. There are moments when you are really affected by what you're learning. It just all of a sudden you realize there's a different way of thought. There's something that you never knew about. It really shakes you. And that's, I think, what happened with Ruth and Naomi, especially because Ruth's speech to Naomi was focused on taking on Naomi's way of life. That she's going to go to her land. Her people are going to be her people. And part of what that means is that Naomi's customs are going to be her customs. Naomi's laws are going to be her laws. Sometimes you can't teach that directly. You have to inspire confidence and the person will follow you. But the thing is that you can't seek it out. It just has to happen. I don't know. What do you think, Brian? Is there any way to pre-plan a mentorship relationship like that?
Nah, I really can't see that as being the case. Like you made what I consider a very valid point. You may find this person who you want to be your mentor, and you go and you talk to them, and you realize fairly quickly that this is not going to you would like it to. I could definitely see that happening. It's just almost, I hate to say chance. I don't believe God leaves things to chance. I actually think he does things very much on purpose. But as to which person you meet who will be your mentor, that's a good question. You just kind of find out along the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an
Hmm.
interesting situation.
Yeah.
I got kind of another question for you.
Sure. Sure.
We were just talking about it. I never thought about this because I was in public school when I grew up or whatever like that, and of course the way things go there, you know. But you said basically you would like to, as a teacher, or at teachers being in the Christian Academy,
Hmm.
Berean
Hmm.
Academy specific,
Hmm.
that you would like them to quite literally, you know, want to have their, you know, your God be their God, which I guess for some reason or another, and this may sound kind of funny, but I had never thought of it that way, that actual Christian education, because I think of education almost as a separate thing from Christianity, although it's not, and I know that.
Hmm.
But
Right.
it kind of shocked me for a second. I'm like, wait a minute, we're talking seriously about a teacher who involves themselves from a Christian point of view in a Christian school, that literally they're almost like part of their job, quite literally, is to teach their students or tell their students about Christ.
Right.
And
Yeah. I mean,
that to me, I mean, I hate to have to say it like that, and I don't know if it just, maybe it's just me, but it's sort of like, you know, wow, you know, hang on a second, you know, because
right.
I always come from the point of view of education as much
Mhm.
as Christianity, you know, especially when we're doing this, we're talking about, you
Right.
know, the Bible and you know, in education like that. So that was just
Well, I think it is. It is not the way that schools function in most cases, right? Even Christian schools. I think that there's not a sense that the people that you're putting in the classroom to teach your children are supposed to inspire them with so much confidence that they literally it brings them. They see God in your God. They see God in the teacher's God. They realize the teacher has opened the door to a truth that is so important and everlasting, that they want to be part of it. They have that desire to remain in that way that the teacher has shown them. The way that Naomi says, "I'm going to go with you," you know, even if other people abandon you. It is not the way that most schools operate. I think most schools operate that these are matters of conscience that should be kept away from the the from people's thoughts on that level. But I do think it is. I would feel that this is the way. I think that the Ruth Naomi relationship, it can't be every single teacher student relationship, but I think that you should have that happening in a good Christian school. If the Spirit of the Lord is with you, and if it is moving your classrooms, you should have moments like that where the students are, they all of a sudden see a different way of life, a different way of thinking, even if they came in and they thought they were Christian, to really get the fullness of the gospel. I think students, so you should see moments where students are saying, wow, this is completely, I want to leave the land of Moab and go to Israel. I want to be there. That's where I want to live. I want to, metaphorically speaking, I want to be in that place. I'm willing to leave behind the place where I've been. And
exactly, exactly.
yeah. Yeah. And the
That,
fact that she says, your God will be my God, I think that line is so important because otherwise it's just a relationship between two people that maybe is clingy and unhealthy. You could almost look at it that way at that point in chapter one. But that line that your God will be my God, it kind of tells us, it cues us to see that God is the one who is putting this connection between them there. And really, the purpose is it's not for Naomi to have a legacy. It's not for Ruth to be able to have a proxy mother figure. It's both of them are being brought to God through being with each other. Because it's Ruth's companionship that allows Naomi to return to find her kinsman redeemer, Boaz, when they go back to Israel. And it's Naomi's roots in Israel that allow Ruth to go to Israel.
yeah, that's the thing. As you kind of read along, you start to see God working in the situation and how, you know, how it actually plays out that way. It was meant to be, as you almost say, the fact that she actually says, "I want your God to be my God," that's key. That makes a big
Yeah,
difference in what happens next.
well, and it's interesting. I think what happens in the next three chapters of the book, of course, is that they go back and uh, Ruth, they're starving. These are very tough times. They come back, and Ruth needs to glean. Literally, she needs to benefit from the law of Israel, which says that the stalks of grain that fall to the ground are left for the poor to go and pick up. And so through that, she becomes exposed to Boaz. But you see, even when they get to Israel, of course, Naomi is she's teaching Ruth. She's giving her advice about how to deal with Boaz and how to marry him. Um, uh, as a man, I have to go very light. I have to tread very carefully on this because I do feel like the last three chapters of the Book of Ruth are a model of woman to woman education. I think that entire mentorship relationship then moves into an area that I just don't think men are involved in relationships like that. You know what I mean? I don't know. What do you think, Brian? I think it's an excellent book to remind us that women are part of a Christian education system, and women have a clear role as teachers. They have a clear role as students. They need to be taught. They need people to learn from them. And that even in a relationship where it's not a mother and daughter, because remember that Naomi and Ruth are not mother and daughter, but they have this relationship. She still teaches her these things. I just can't picture if either of them were a man. I just don't think that story would have felt the same. What do you think? I don't think the lessons and the teachings.
Yeah, you don't really see much that kind of thing necessarily, not on that depth, I guess would be a good way to
Mm-hmm.
put it, because the two ladies, like you said, it was just they kind of there's a different I'm trying to get the right word here. Basically, there's a different togetherness. I know I'm not hitting on exactly the right word I'm looking for, but there's the way they mesh, the way they come together is kind of completely different, and that has a lot to do, I think, with both of them being ladies, of course, both of them being in a very hard situation, and both of them working together to kind of
Mm-hmm.
survive, much less, actually come out with anything good in all this. It's kind of an interesting situation as it progresses.
Well, this is what's interesting. In chapter 3, I'm going to read you chapter 3 of the Book of Ruth, because this is, I think, an example of uh, women educating women, and it's a lesson plan, if you will, that I think it's very specific to women. It's this. Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find security for you so that you'll be taken care of? Now, isn't Boaz our relative? Haven't you been working with his female servants? This evening he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go in and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will explain to you what you should do." So Ruth said to her, "I will do everything you say." She went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother in law had instructed her. After Boaz ate, drank, and was in good spirits, he went to lie down at the end of the pile of barley. Then she went in, secretly uncovered his feet, and lay down. At midnight, Boaz was startled, turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman. So he asked, "Who are you?" "I am Ruth, your slave," she replied. "Spread your cloak over me, for you are a family redeemer." Then he said, "May the Lord bless you, my daughter. You have shown more kindness now than before, because you have not pursued younger men, whether rich or poor. Now don't be afraid, my daughter. I will do for you whatever you say, since all the people in town know that you are a woman of noble character. Yes, it is true that I am a family redeemer, but there is a redeemer closer than I am. Stay there tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, that's good. Let him redeem you. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will. Now lie down until morning." Okay, one little quick note. There's a little bit of discussion about what a family redeemer is. I think it's kind of a title that's given to someone within a family who obviously has a certain amount of money and can help people in the family when they're on hard times, right? Um, uh, but let's go back to the story, which is the instructions that Ruth gives to Naomi. Now, when I studied this with my daughter, it felt very uncomfortable, to be honest with you. It was just an uneasy reading for a father to read with his daughter, because my daughter was like, she said, is Ruth is being told to basically trick this guy into, I think the term that my daughter said was gold digger. So I had to kind of step back and explain to her, no, this is not a gold digger situation.
That's funny.
It's,
That's hilarious.
it's, I mean, how do you, number one, I don't think that this is anything like a male teacher and a male student. Like, no, you know what I mean? And I think if it were a male teacher and a female student, that would be really creepy, right? I think if it were a female teacher and a male student, we're back into creepy territory. This is something that it would really just be the kind of thing that women can teach other women.
Yeah, should we make a kind of a point here to say that in a mentor relationship, especially a Christian one, might want to consider men being with men and women being with women? I think that would be strange.
I think that's a good question. What do you think? I mean, even when I go to Christian K through 12 environments, very, very strong, very conservative Christian environments, it still is overwhelmingly women teachers. And so,
good point.
Let's start by asking, do you agree that the teaching relationship between Ruth and Naomi seems to be something very, very important? That,
yeah, I kind of like the fact that you brought up it seemed almost like a mentorship. It's not that, the teaching part seemed to be more along the lines of, okay, here's what you do. These are the laws. These are the rules that we, as being Israelites, since she's coming to be part of them, this is how you do this kind of deal. So there's definitely the educational part of it, as well as just but the mentorship seemed to be almost a little more appropriate. That's why I like when you said that. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's
I think it's important. It's an important lesson, because finding a husband, finding a life mate, and starting a family is an important thing. My daughter, when I read it with her, felt like she was uncomfortable with the idea that it sounds like Naomi's kind of teaching her how to be manipulative in order to get a husband to pay their bills, right? And I said to my daughter, no, that's not what's happening here. I'm just trying to think of what's the best way to counter that. I think that Ruth and Naomi have a relationship that is so long-standing, and Naomi is willing to take care of her. So let's say, just in a hypothetical world, that Ruth did this. She uncovered Boaz's feet, and then Boaz didn't want to marry her, and he couldn't support her. Ruth knows that Naomi is still going to be there to take care of her. And Naomi knows that Ruth is still going to be there to take care of her. So it's give it a shot, give it the old college try. Maybe this will work, right? But you can only give that kind of advice if you have a really strong teacher-student relationship. And I don't think that this is the type of student relationship that you can have between a man and another man, or between a woman and a man. It has to be, I think, a woman-to-woman thing. I'm not so concerned about women teaching men as I am who's going to teach girls in Christian education settings. Who can have conversations like that with a female student? What do you think?
In this particular situation, I would almost be willing to suggest that there is a portion of it, anyways, I'll put it that way, that is educational in the fact that these are the laws, these are the rules. This is how, if listening for a second, that Ruth was actually an Israelite. Never mind that she was a Moabite to begin with, but she was actually an Israelite girl who lost her own husband or whatever like that, right? Now, to part of the rules, we're talking about Leviticus or whatever like that, was the redeemers and everything that kind of go with it, because basically the whole idea was something along the lines of, correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't want certain lands belong to certain people. They could finance the land if they were running on hard times. They could sell it to somebody, but they would always get it back at a certain time. And then the same thing still applies as well, in that if somebody dies within the family and there's nobody kind of left, there's this person who can still carry on the family name. That was the whole point of all of this. So there's definitely an educational so far as this is the rules, this is how God's, the God that you now serve has set this up to do stuff like that. So there's the educational part of that, but at the same time, there is a level deeper than that. And I think that's what you're kind of hitting on, that is between the two ladies in and of
Yeah,
themselves.
well, yeah, and I think that I guess I'm trying to put it in terms of how I can respond to my daughter, who just takes this as there's something off-putting in the story, at least to my daughter. She feels like Naomi's teaching Ruth how to manipulate men, and it's like a Marilyn Monroe movie about how to marry a millionaire or something like that. And I don't think I don't think that that's a fair way to read it, because kind of like going to what you're saying, they had such a long-standing relationship. They were so close and they had a history together. And so when she tells her to try this thing of uncovering Boaz's feet and going to sleep next to him by the barley pile, that Ruth knows that it's not like she's passing on some manipulative trick and to get rid of her or something like that. The fact is that they know they're going to take care of each other. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, they're going to be able to continue on. Do you know what I mean? But it was in God's
Yeah.
will that the trick did work, and he did marry him. I think that going back to the issue of gender-specific education, this is a tough issue, because let's if in fact this is a very unique female to female teacher student relationship here in Ruth, I don't think it's necessary. First of all, I don't think a male teacher should ever have a conversation like this with a female student. You agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. That would be like a little on the inappropriate side.
that would be phone calls, investigation kind of stuff, right? So you're not going to have that conversation between. I don't think it would be appropriate between a female teacher and a male student either, because
Not when you're trying to get married or get a girl or something like that. Definitely no. That's something. Yeah, a little off, a little awkward, a little weird. Yeah.
Well, I think that it wouldn't work for a female teacher to be having a conversation like that with a male student, because women and men are different, and the way that women deal with life challenges is going to be a little bit more like this. I don't think that you can that advice, that type of advice, is not going to work for a young man who's trying to find a job. You know what I mean? Because trying to find a man a job, you're going to be the founder of the home. You have to provide for everybody. You can't be trying to manipulate and finding a rich woman who's going to take care of you. You know what I mean?
I follow where you're going with that now. Yeah, okay. I agree.
Yeah. Gotcha. So I think that we do need some gender-specific venues where you have a female teacher and a female student to be able to deal with questions like this. It's just appropriate. And I think that at the same time, I also think that you do need more male teachers in the Christian education system. I think we have a lot of women who are teaching in the Christian schools, and I think that we should try to get more men in those roles, because when at certain turning points like this in a man's life, I think he can't follow this educational model. I don't think that works. I don't know how you would view it, but that's my take on it.
Well, that kind of leads to a different question, I guess you could say, in the fact that since there are primarily lady teachers out there, you do have some men teachers. How many of those men teachers are actually Christian and would actually teach in a Christian education, Christian school? Good question. But then, assuming that you have the normal split between guys and girls for your students, how would you mentor the guys? So obviously, you would have a better chance of mentoring the ladies with the lady teachers.
Right.
How would you mentor the guys?
Well, right now in Christian schools, what we deal with this by just having them get mentored by women, and then a lot of these guys, their dads are not in the home either. They don't have male role models at home, and they're in Christian schools and they're being mentored by Christian women. I think it's a problem. I think that it's a structural issue. It's not something that one school can solve. But I do think that as an industry, Christian education has to get more men in these teaching positions in the younger ages, because I don't, like, for instance, if you have a Naomi figure trying to mentor a young Samson figure, that's not going to work. Naomi giving advice like this or interacting with a young Samson in this fashion, I don't think is necessarily going to lead to a good outcome when it comes to these topic matter, the subject matter. I think that on certain levels, you do need male mentors for male students. Now, having said that, we're going against the grain because everything I'm saying reinforces the binary gender roles, and of course, that is something that all the public school systems are working against. The Christian school systems are largely not trying to address. They're just kind of surrendered on it. And so I think it is something that we have to consider as educators, that it does matter.
My personal experience as far as this sort of thing going, I would completely agree. It's just it's a hard situation. I understand that, but at the same time, part of being a mentor, part of being a Christian leader, school leader, however you want to look at that, there's certain rules and things that apply to our lives that are going to be contrary to, especially the today's social activism, whatever you want to call it. Sorry, I'm not getting the right word out, but basically just the climate at the moment. You know what I mean?
Right.
It'll liable to change at any moment, but still, even then, there's going to be things that don't necessarily jive with what we stand for and what we believe as Christians. So, right there with you.
Well, I think another thing that I wanted to bring up about the Book of Ruth is the fact that Naomi really is mentoring Ruth in a very wide range of life experiences. She really is. She's educating the whole person, and that I think that's an important model to think of as well, and to remember that to a certain degree, when you have a student, you need to have certain professional boundaries, certainly, but things that are going on in the student's life do matter. If they're struggling, if they're not eating breakfast, if their needs are not being met, that is something that you have to keep in mind. That is going to affect their performance, and you have to be considerate to that. I'm not saying you're going to have a student move into your home, or you shouldn't start buying their lunch. You shouldn't do things like that. That's not good. But those are important things to consider, because you see in the Ruth and Naomi example where Naomi she's very concerned for Ruth's welfare. And I do want to reiterate also that a key thing of why Naomi is such a good mentor, such a good teacher in this particular book of the Bible, is that she tells Ruth, you're free to go. You're not bound to my way of living by force, but she does such a good job at giving an example to Ruth that Ruth wants to follow her way of life willingly, and I think that's important. I think that you can't force people to take on your belief in Christ. You know what I mean? There has to be a certain amount of free will or choice in the person you're teaching to do it. And sometimes I think in Christian education systems, there is too much repression. There's too much of a mandate forcing people, making it so that it's against the rules to question things, or to struggle with certain concepts. And I like the fact that Naomi tells Ruth, you can go if you want. In fact, she encourages her to. But it's Ruth that says, I want to go with you, go and follow you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it really was when I was growing up in school. I don't know how it was for you, so you can kind of maybe answer that. But when I was growing up in school, it was one of those type of things that you really, like I said, you didn't really question the adults. You didn't really question your teachers necessarily. Maybe you had a good teacher who kind of wanted you to think on your own. Maybe you took that advice, maybe you didn't. It wasn't really until I was in college, until actually here recently, and I'm 40, 49 almost here. And, so it's kind of one of those type of situations that now I can see that. I can see where that style of education, that ability, think for yourself is obviously a good thing, something that you want to instill in a student. It's almost revolutionary if you think about it compared to the way I grew up. But so that's kind of just kind of a crazy thought.
I think that Naomi has a way of life. She is very set in her ways. She's an Israelite and she believes in God, and she's not so flexible with her ways of thinking that she's just going to start teaching heresy to Ruth, even though Ruth is a Moabite, But I do think that that statement to her, that basically it's like, you're not my prisoner. You don't owe me anything because of our relationship as an older person and a younger person. Um, but she had instilled she had been such a good example to Ruth that Ruth really felt, and of course the Holy Spirit intervened, obviously, and drew Ruth to Naomi because that was a way for her to get into Israel and also for her to bring the line of the lineage to David and therefore to Jesus in the house of
Yeah, when I
Judah.
say all that, when I'm saying all that, I'm just thinking about which I guess kind of what you were talking about. Naomi allows her the opportunity to do what she wants. In other words, nobody's forcing you to follow what these things that I am telling you. But at the same
Hmm.
time, there's a lot of explanation going on there. I mean, there has to be, this is we do this, this is how come we do this sort of thing. And she's probably been learning this as she's gotten married to one of her sons, and during that
Hmm.
time, and all, there's
Hmm.
plenty of education going on there for both of them while they were together. And Ruth just kind of sticks with it and becomes essentially her daughter, as it were, even though she was a daughter-in-law. But still, there's
Hmm.
just that part of it that, like you said, to the point that Ruth is inspired to the point where she's willing to listen.
Hmm.
She's willing to sit down and take Naomi's advice. And you know what? I don't necessarily understand what's going on, but I'm willing to pay attention to what you're
Right.
telling me and give it a try.
Hmm.
That's like I said. I really can't. I can't even think of a person that I've had as a mentor that's been something that I could say that about, and to be able to
I
be
mean,
that for somebody.
I had a couple, not a lot, but I had several mentors who I really looked up to in that way, and I've seen negative circumstances of that and positive circumstances of it. Negative where I was led to really idolize a teacher that was not teaching truth. That's bad because then that can become cult leaderish. You know what I mean? And that's why it's good that Naomi says to Ruth, "You can leave if you want," because she's not being a cult leader. She's not demanding an oath of loyalty. You know, and I think that I can say that that reinforces the point that I made earlier that you can't pre-plan these types of mentor relationships. They come into your life when God wills it, and you can't predict it. Sometimes people will come into your life and they look up to you in that way, and you should be there when God puts that in your path. But and you have to constantly, as a teacher, you have to constantly examine yourself and be a good person because if you're a teacher and you do get a following of people who really really want to follow in your footsteps, if you're a bad person, you're leading them astray, and we know what the Bible says about that. Jesus said it's better for you to have a millstone thrown around your neck and thrown to the bottom of the sea than that you should lead one of these astray. And the
Yeah,
blind
especially
can't.
being kids.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Well, so let me ask you this. Why is it that most people, I would venture a guess that most people would say that that special poem that Naomi and Ruth share, or that Ruth states to Naomi, where she says, "Where you go, I will go." Why do we read that at weddings as opposed to at school? I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
most people would think that would be creepy in a school setting, but if you think about it, it's even creepier that we read it at weddings because that's being read from a woman to the mother of the man that she married and who has died, right? I mean, so it's kind of funny how we have taken the text and given it a meaning that it actually doesn't offer us.
like I said, that sort of thing kind of happens actually a lot in I won't call it Christianity, but in pseudo Christianity, I think I don't remember if I've told you this before. I think you may have been around when we've talked about it before. United States is nominally Christian. And it's kind of like in other places. I talked to a friend of mine who is from Japan. They are consider themselves Buddhist country for the most part, because if you ask somebody, what do you believe in? Well, I'm a Buddhist, because that's just the main religion there. Well, it's the same thing in the United States, except for it's Christianity. Now, of those people who actually read, those people who call themselves a Christian, but who actually read their Bible, maybe they know where that particular quote comes from, maybe not. Maybe they know the circumstances in which it was actually said, maybe not, but it sounds good. I mean, on the surface, that's kind of the main thing. I mean, the words themselves, without the context, just sound great for a wedding. I mean, they really
I know.
do.
Where you go, I go. I will go. Well, it's also kind of the one thing that I think is creepy about it for a wedding is, the line, "Your God will be my God." That makes sense from a younger woman to an older woman saying, "Wow, you've shown me who the real God is. I'm going to abandon my idols because you've educated me." Right? That's different than in a marriage where you're saying, "Okay, whatever my spouse worships, I'm going to go follow them," because that leads back to Solomon's mistake, right, where he starts going after his wife's idols and things of that sort. So that poem, I think that you could spend a lifetime thinking about uh, where it is appropriate to read that poem, like where is it appropriate to use that as a celebration. I know most people would find that creepy to read in a school situation because it sounds like, okay, you're a little bit too close to your teacher, right? But I think that if you think about it in an abstract intellectual sense, it makes a lot more sense as a mentor-mentee relationship.
Well,
Yeah.
especially having you explain it like that, I think actually it does make a bit more sense, because especially given a Christian, the Christian idea, the Christian school or whatever like that. I mean, with the purpose being not just education, in other words, going on to college and actually, understanding the math and understanding the
Mm.
English and all the other fun stuff that goes with that, but also for the like you said, the fact that we're trying to actually bring these people to a knowledge of Christ, these kids to the knowledge of Christ in the first place.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
you want to
Well,
come
and
at it from that point of view? Yeah.
it all goes together. I mean, she teaches her trades of how to live life, how to glean in a grain field, etc. She's teaching her all that, and it's part that all goes together with her walk. Well, thank you very much, Brian. I really appreciate you joining us. It's too bad that we lost Colonel Mike. I tried to bring
I
him
was
in,
looking
but
forward to that too. Yeah, I know.
I know, and he has great takes on things, but that just I don't know. Restream is a little bit of a gamble. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Next week we're diving into First Samuel, so we're going to be getting into the dynasties of the kings, and of course the monarchy has educational issues that are very complex. That there's a lot to think about. So I'm so happy that we made it an entire hour of discussing this very short book of the Bible. So next week it's going to be the complete opposite, where we're going to be trying to get through so much in the story of Saul and David and Samuel, etc. That we'll do our best to try to figure out what that tells us about teaching. Thank you very much for joining.
Y'all good evening.